Hello, wonderful and perfect people of GWTV. Hopefully everyone's having a good afternoon. Congratulations to Capital Crossfire for their successful third and final shoot of the semester, and welcome to the spring installment of GWTV's DEI Speaker Series. My name is Avanti Patwardhan. I am the DEI Director of GWTV, and I'm so excited to host this conversation about emotions in media and journalism. We are here with our guest speaker for this afternoon, Professor Jeta Abazi Gashi. Dr. Jeta Abazi Gashi is an adjunct professor and research visitor at the Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communications. So if you guys have attended events, you know you have Dr. Gashi to thank for that. She also co-moderates the ambassadorial series, Engaging America at the Institute. So welcome, Professor Gashi. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add before we get started?
Yeah, I would like to thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I couldn't say no to your invitation. So thank you so much, Avanti. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much. Hi. Welcome. No, super happy to have you here. We're very lucky to have you here. So before we get into the media part of our conversation, I think it would be helpful to go over some basics, because I know we spent a good chunk of Module 1. So for context, I'm taking Emotions and Perceptions in StratCom with Maria, with Professor Gashi this semester. And we spent a lot of time talking about how do we define emotions, how do we contextualize them, what does that even mean? So how should we define emotions? What is the best way to do that in this context?
Yeah, I also see some people here that I remember when I was trying to design the course, I took their advices, and I'm very thankful. So the first challenge would begin if we would want to conceptualize emotions. And here we have to distinguish from emotions when we speak in a daily conversation. I think we know what we refer to emotions, but scholars do remind us that there are more than like 19 concepts on emotions, and this is not a weak point. This is a sign that tells that there is a lot of debate going on in emotions, and that comes as a contribution of different fields, different sections. So there is no consensus on what emotions are, but what is important is that they are very important tools to analyze political communication, to analyze what national leaders want us to think and what they want us to elicit. They are very important to when conceptualizing and writing strategies for media. If we want to study journalism, they are very important to understand how we frame emotions. I've been very happy to teach this course this semester, and I've tried to conceptualize in the way that it makes sense to students. And I think I do have the advantage of combining, because I've worked also as a practitioner, as a journalist, and I'm a scholar that includes interdisciplinary work. That has helped me to kind of craft the course, and that has helped me to translate different sections and make this course more interesting to students, and also myself, because it has to be also interesting for me when I teach the course.
Yes, of course. So in your experience as a journalist, as a practitioner, and as a scholar, what is the main academic debate you see over emotions and their universality? I know we talked about it, we read some articles in class. What do you see as like the main distinction that people tend to err on when describing emotions or defining them?
I would want to add some personal note to the interest of teaching emotions and senses in global communication. I do come from a very small country, Kosovo, and this is a society that is very, that puts a lot of importance to relational communication. For example, in the capital, if people would say, let's have a coffee together, coffee is just the reference of trying to understand how sincere is someone to emotions, and trying to kind of translate how close are you to that offer, to that job, because in some societies the verbal communication is less important as it's important the emotional communication. If emotions are universal, if we take the work of Paul Ekman, who is known for crafting the idea of basic emotions such as happiness, sadness, disgust, anger, surprise, then this has been proven that even among blinds, they have the same reaction. So we do mirror emotions, but we have these core emotions that we need to construct and we need to perform. What is important is that in some languages, there are challenges in constructing certain emotions. Both language and emotions are socially constructed, but that doesn't mean that emotions are different universally. That means that linguistically, they can be framed or sad in different ways. And I wanted to bring examples of different languages. For example, in English, I could say, I'm happy to be here, but that doesn't mean that I can apply in every language, because happiness is not only the presence, but it has to be more of a feeling of a satisfaction. So I believe to the idea that emotions are performed. Let's say today, in order for me to appear that I'm excited about this interview, I would be laughing more,
Smiling more.
smiling. But that is a performative way that I want to say that, you know, I'm satisfied to be among you and to kind of show some seriousness in my presence. So that doesn't mean that I'm acting, but I have to perform certain role.
Correct.
Same if we are applying for a job and we have a job interview, we have to appear excited. Or when we are confronted with a situation that has been injustice, has been not fair to us, we have to imply correctness, but also some anger to that.
Correct.
So universally speaking, there are basic emotions that have been used to be distinguished, but the challenge is on terms of language. You remember when we talked in the class when how emotions are, I wouldn't say that there is a turn in emotions or studying emotions, because even if we go back to Plato or Aristotle, then we see that the importance of emotions have been there. And now in some media platforms, social media and in the different genres, for example, in film, the study of emotions is not à la mode, but it's present. The movie Inside Out was a great example to show that it's not just the popularity itself, but because they relied on scientific work. Actually, they did also rely on the Paul Ekman categorizations of emotions. It made the movie even more interesting. So yeah, I don't know if I went too far with your question. There is some universality among the way we conceptualize emotions, but I more would think that there's some social construction, there is some mimic on that, and there is some, there is some kind of elicitation of emotions.
Correct. Now, you mentioned social media, the film Inside Out. I know we talked about some of this in class as well. What are, if you could just list or categorize some of the main mediums through which we experience emotions or create emotions? I know we talked about text, audiovisual. We spent a good amount of time on memes and emojis as well. So what categories would you define for those?
I wouldn't start provoking you with dance, but dance, music, film are these classical examples.
Correct.
Books, we read something and then our imagination goes beyond what movies can actually construct. But then since we are at SMPA, I would bring elections. Elections are a great tool, a great platform to see how emotions are framed, how are crafted, or how emotions are used to, let's say, nationalize fear or nationalize pride. Religion, as I've studied the question of religion, is a great platform to see, when used positively, how it unifies people. When there are security attacks, yes, it unifies people in terms of being together and showing solidarity, but also divide people and shaming, feeling guiltiness, because if media manage to create division between us and them, and having superiority between certain groups, then these divisions are very important. Sport, I mean, in the United States, even in university, you see how important sport is to create this sense of belonging.
Yes, correct.
We are this community, we have this mascot. And nowadays, with the speed of internet, I mean, a meme can travel faster than a very detailed crafted message that the company builds up. A meme, though, can bring disgust as an emotion feeling, but has a vast amount of traveling and reaching to audiences. So we have to think very creatively if we are media strategists how we craft a message, because this can be very quick.
Correct. That was an excellent segue into the next section of the conversation. And I was going to ask, what does it mean to engage emotion in the media? So, in terms of your experience as a practitioner, can you give a little bit more insight or provide examples of how journalists and communicators intentionally or maybe unintentionally shape their audience's feelings? And I know you provided examples of like sports or leaders nationalizing fear. What role does the media play in that?
If you're traveling with someone and once you say, I'm a journalist, you're often criticized like that you are the one bringing mainly negative stories or negative emotions. And then that not only causes news avoidance, but in personal level and also while working as a journalist, often taxi drivers would taught me how important it is not to cover just negative news, because that leads to negative emotions. There are many, many examples. I think when journalists report on national days, the Venus, symbols, flags, anthems are such an important symbols of this national identity. Maybe with conscious or without unconscious, they speak in the name of us, our nation, our country, not necessarily with a sense of superiority aspect, but they do mark this prideness as a very important emotional response. Protests are something very important when journalists frame certain protests, because this community, not only they need to have sort of a glue that they are all joined together, and this glue is their emotional response. If there's a protest, they maybe are angry about certain event, they want to have this anger as a, let's say, code, as a algorithm that unifies all this community. And because of that anger or because of that code, journalists need to frame that event. And if you're a practitioner, if you would want to have an interviewer who positions himself happy with an event, you're automatically framing that event. If you want to interview someone who is not satisfied with what's going on, they need to find someone that appears angry. So media do frame emotions discursively, because they use certain text, they use certain audio, they use certain
imagery,
video, and then they frame this event. There's another aspect that I really find it intriguing with the role of the media, the meta emotions, and I think we've spoke about that. For example, through films, but also through other genres, we see that we are trained to think what anger looks like. For example, there's a movie and we want to see an angry person. That person might be throwing things, the lighting would start changing, the music would be dramatic, or if we want to go even more analytical, we see a woman crying. So media not only frame certain emotions, but they also explain what certain emotions should look like. And this is sort of a meta emotion effect that media do have.
So, in terms of a field like journalism, where objectivity is key, transparency is key, how do you see journalists mitigate emotions so that, yes, they are framing whatever event they're covering, accurately, they're capturing the correct sentiments, but I mean, we just talked about like sowing distrust or creating anger, and where's the fine line in that?
I think we will not be able to have a demarcation of that, but what is important, and since we will be working, and I will be working, and you'll be having colleagues that study journalism or international affairs, our aim should not be having a discourse that puts journalists as someone who do not provide the truth. Let's have the classical thought that journalists build information about what truth is. And it's not helpful, and it's very scary to have societies where journalists are to be blamed for not covering the truth. So let's shift the focus and think of how national leaders elicit and frame emotions. If they want to nationalize certain emotion like anger or fear, they do that. If they want to nationalize certain emotions of pride, if they want to nationalize shameness of certain event, they do that. And now with the rise of authoritarianism and with the rise of populism, negative emotions, if we are about to categorize emotions, although I'm not in favor of that, certain leaders are very good on crafting messages that can divide societies, that can divide groups, that can make certain emotions be associated only with certain community, and then that create division, inclusion is not achieved, and so on and so forth.
So based on the trends you just mentioned, so emotional polarization is on the rise, is also increasing, and national leaders, members of the public servants, governments, they all have a huge role to play in that. What role does the media have in either playing into it or mitigating it? I mean, you just talked about the role of the journalist, how they should be committed to building facts about the truth, committed to the truth. So what does their role look like when leaders are nationalizing emotions?
So now it depends what we're thinking about media. Are we only thinking about journalists? Are we thinking news on the internet? Are we thinking also about movies, songs? One important aspect is that, I don't think I'm repeating myself, but for example, creating a certain image for certain community when portraying migrants, having certain behavioral aspects, when framing pride, having only certain community, of having that association with, when not giving space to certain community, not allowing them to have their voice is another way. So it depends who are we referring to the media, and it depends what is being framed in moments or during conflicts situation that becomes even more problematic, of framing guilt or framing grief. And now with what's going on in the world, we might say that the polarization have grown up, but what some political parties are very good on, when rethinking and recreating the past, and then the blaming discourse of that past, rather because of taking the pride of that past, as we have seen it with blue collars, or associating that certain group is bringing something negative, like for example, migrants are taking our jobs, and then these negative association do bring framing, actually do put some community on the spot for certain events.
Okay. So we've talked about journalism, the news media. Now, if we talk about like political communication practitioners, the strategists, people who work on comms teams, what is the most effective, or what are the most effective ways to use emotions for specific political communication goals, for a campaign, for example? I know we talked a little bit about this in class as well.
There have been some research recently on relating how populists are using negative emotions, and how, especially in the United States, how it was the fear and anger that influenced people to vote more than pride and hope, as it had been in the past with, let's say, Obama or other leaders. Bernie Sanders was that an example. But then again, you have Mandani, who had a different turning out of the elections. What are I think a combination of different tools would be an answer to that, and not to avoid the effect that internet has now, to incorporate these tools. But I think it's unavoidable to have a message that will not have or provoke certain emotions. I don't know if we talked about the senses, but if there is no consensus on conceptualizing emotions, another challenge that has been created in the political debate is that neuroscience are going beyond the classical examples of what senses are.
Okay.
But what is more interesting is that how senses and inflammatory senses have been used to create division through scent. There was an example of a scholar who published her thesis related how the literature in the 19th century or in 17th century used scent to create division and to create even misogynist division. And this scholar, she was attacked because in different levels, because she was a woman, because sometimes this creative way of approaching science or research is seen less as objective. And she was also attacked because less and less people think that scent can be something that create division. Although scent can be used also in positive way, there are countries who use scent national way to create a positive image through flowers. Correct. Other senses have been used positively in public diplomacy, let's say food, dance. Correct. So there are various ways, and as practitioner and as scholars, we would need to combine these tools and incorporate in our work.
Okay, I want to go back to the point you were making about pride and shame and hope. What about today's media landscape do you think makes it more conducive for political actors to function on fear and anger and for that to spread more quickly and mobilize more people rather than a message of hope? I mean, you brought up the example of Obama, which was very much, people were motivated by his message of hope. And we saw that again with the election of Mamdani. But do you think we can return to that trend, or are those just the exceptions?
It depends with the context we're living. If we are living in a polarized world, if we're living in a world that there are many wars going on, hope would not be very helpful because it has to bring some anger. And why it has to be to bring the anger? Because it's related to injustice. If we see a thirst, we will think that visually that's gonna help that leader solve the issue of injustice. But if we are having this context of so many uncertainties, hope is not going to work. But then it depends. It depends from a country, it depends from a leader, it depends from their strategy, it depends from the voters. Because at the same time, while, for example, there was another positive example in Romania, a more pro-European leader got elected last year in 2025. Then we had the example of New York, but at the same time we had other examples in Germany and other places. So it's hard to predict, but some researchers are saying that there is a trend, we might return again, some related to the populist rise, some related to the rise of, as I mentioned, authoritarianism. So I think it's hard to say.
Would you pin some of the, I don't want to say blame, or would you attribute some of this trend to just the way our media landscape functions today in general, like the internet, social media, how there's 24/7 news, so many channels to learn information from, people are constantly bombarded with information. Do you think that has a role to play in this? Or do you think it's a global political shift that is separated from the media landscape?
I wouldn't be on the category that I would blame the media, because I have also personally worked as a journalist, and depends who are we referring to the media.
I guess I mean like the media environment, the way the media is structured, instead of like broadcast news is being pushed aside a little bit by social media. You have so many more voices. You have a multitude of citizen journalists, not just mainstream news organizations. So, and people are sharing information so quick. I mean, you were talking about how a meme can travel so fast. Do you think tools like memes are a reason why we see anger and fear and populism and authoritarianism, kind of coincide a little bit?
I think speed and algorithms could be something that we could blame, because we are more echoed with news that we are surrounded. So it is also a combination of other factors. So the multipolar world that we're living. Correct. The fact, because when we say that citizen journalism is increasing, we are assuming that the classical journalism of verifying, of filtering, of editing the news is going to happen. But now more and more we do see examples of media going beyond the informative role and also stepping into entertaining, informative journalism. So it's a combination of all factors, but it's very easy now with the speed of internet and with the algorithm to have your own kind of world and the world you choose to read and trust.
So, in that sense, I mean, when you talk about the role of the journalist changing, or the way news is being changed, infotainment, entertainment, whatever you would like to call it, what should audiences be paying attention to when they feel a strong emotional reaction to a story? How can we prep citizens and the public to think about emotions and the role they play in media and journalism a bit more clearly?
Mm-hmm. I think that now, as an audience, so much work has been left by ourselves. We have to decide what to trust. We have to decide as an audience what to read. We have to control our emotions. I do see some self-management aspect from the audience. As it's with food, we have to know where we're eating and what we're eating, and we have to know if we want to say consumers or as audience, what we are taking as a news. So it's so much in our hands, and it's difficult, and it's not easy. It's a lot. Yeah.
A lot of responsibility. All right, do we have any audience questions? Anything? Okay, I'm gonna go with Brady.
Hi, thank you for being here. I had a quick question. So you mentioned how the media has shaped how the audience views emotions, and how those norms are implemented by the media, like how we should view what the outcomes are of a certain emotion. So do you think the norms of emotions will change in the future by media, or do you think it will stay the same as they are right now?
Okay. Well, media, even if when we think from Heidegger perspective, have had always technology and had made things change. I don't think that norms can change, emotional norms can change, but I do think that we might underestimate the role of the emotions, because there's so much information that we can reach. There's so much information that we have to read in order to have let's say, a picture about an event. It's interesting because, for example, in the United States, the way young generation, for example, perceive fear, it's so different compared to the Europe. I've seen, for example, that more young people fear from misinformation as they would fear from diseases, which is very interesting. I don't think norms would change, but societies and people are very good at imitating and going fast with adaptation. So I don't think that will change, but it will change the rhythm of it.
Thank you.
Okay, Maria.
I guess the question that I had was, in class we talked a lot last week about the visual aspect of emotions in media. We spoke to a photojournalist who I thought was super interesting. Thank you so
Amazing.
much for bringing them on.
Valeria Flesch, yeah.
Yes. And I guess I'd just like to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on how broadcast journalists in particular can use visual cues to simulate emotion, and I guess that the same would apply to strategic communicators as well, since we live in such a video-focused environment.
So visual. So last week we had this photo documentary journalist, Valeria Flesch. She had been in many countries, and I think most of her photos did frame how grief is covered in societies that has experienced war and traumas, and as well as some sort of a how to say, there were also other emotions of happiness that she had covered, and hope. And she did also bring the issue of replacement of this work by the AI, which was remarkable because you could see how important is the framing of emotions. As media strategists, I mean, we need to learn about emotions because we have to be dealing with humans, and we have to make sure that our messages, if textually, they are crafted in the way that they elicit emotions, they trigger emotions. But if we are able to use visuals like photography or video, that's even more helpful because a picture tells more than a text. Visual is very important. It's more difficult scientifically by the research to study because positioning sometimes do tells what level of authority is that is framed in that event or in that picture. Methodologically, it's more difficult to study visuals than text. I've seen that more and more scholars, not more and more, but scholars do integrate also studying of emojis, studying of memes, studying of this visual aspect that are becoming so important to our life. But then if you go historically and look at these tools, you would see that they were there, but they were not to the extent that we are able to use it today and to the speed that we are able to use it today.
All right. Preston.
I know this is slightly outside the scope of this conversation, but I was very curious to hear your thoughts on corporate communication. Because there's a trend, just that I've noticed personally, about corporations kind of exploiting relatability, especially on social media, saying, oh, we feel the same emotions we do, trying to be like witty and joking in their responses. Like, is that effective? Why do they do that? And also, like, what are going to be the long-term consequences of that?
So I come from a cultural environment that is not very corporate. It's mainly small countries and small companies. But what I've read and experienced is that even like important institutions, let's say NATO or EU, we might think that they have this formal appearance, but there's always some emotional framing of that. Let's say safeness is what something NATO would be aiming to frame emotionally in their let's say strategic communication. In terms of EU has a certain emotion discourse that uses when framing their institution. The same applies, for example, with big companies. Duolingo is one of the examples that would play with a mysterious mascots as it's with killing its symbol and then rebringing because mystery is very important in strategy and it keeps the attention. So it depends, but regardless of the number of the employees, one organization, a corporate or a business, they need a glue, they need a certain emotion that they want to portray. And let's say with the social media, another way, they could be considered as corporate, right? When they crafted the idea that there should be emotions to react, like the like or the other aspects, for a long time they studied if they would have a negative emotions, then because people tend to react more negatively, that would make them be perceived as a company that shares negativity. So that's why they took it out, the negative emotions. So they think about this aspect strategically, how they deal, they have their teams, they progressively work on that. I think the number of employees doesn't play a role in terms of the strategy building, but the image plays a role.
Yeah, that was an excellent question. To wrap up our conversation that we've had today, so all of us at GWTV, we're a student-run television and broadcast organization. What can we do in our work here to practice what you've laid out for us a little bit when it comes to the role of emotions?
So I'm a bit spoiled with students in GW because I find them very engaged, serious. So my dilemma is are they very good in pretending that they are so engaged, or are they really engaged?
Performing emotions.
So you're very good on that, and maybe because I work with a small group of students, I'm a bit impressed. So I don't know if I'm able to give a message. Education is very important tool. It's a very important, not only tool, it's a very important aspect of our life. And if you could survive this current environment, is enough for you to handle. Not giving up the way you do. And I like that students in GW, they always do something extracurricular with their activities. They work all the day and then they come in the lecture. So I have a lot of prideness in them. And my message would be like, just keep going. I'm so sorry what's going on. It's not my fault. I live in that world as well. Yeah.
That was very sweet. Well, thank you so much. That is all the time we have for this afternoon, but thank you so much. This has been super insightful. All of us at GWTV here really appreciate it, and thank you all for being here, and thank you as well for your time.
Thank you so much, Avanti.
Yes. Yay!
We're done.
We're done. That was awesome.
Thank you so much. I think you made it awesome.
No, you made it awesome. Oh my goodness.
I think I started at some point to repeat myself. but
No, you didn't.
Okay.
You
I
didn't.
was
You
like, okay, did I
absolutely
say that?
didn't. I was like, that. I feel like that was, like, this is what I feel like students.